welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your day today to join us here at ActiveProspect for what should be an insightful hour diving into TrustedForm Verify. I'm joined today alongside Justin Guido and Christopher Williams. Before we jump into introductions, a little housekeeping. There is a chat icon and a questions icon on the right there. Please use the chat section for general comments and interactions with other participants, and please use the questions section for questions. We will leave time at the end to review and respond, but also throughout this entire webinar, please don't hesitate to ask questions. We love to have an interactive session here. Also, be on the lookout for a few polls during the session to shape our discussion. And lastly, a link to today's recording will be emailed out tomorrow morning for reference and for sharing with colleagues. So with that, we'll be diving into TrustedForm Verify, ActiveProspect's one-to-one consent offering. This segment will be geared towards the advertiser and how Verify can be implemented and leveraged to help ensure one-to-one consent is being presented to consumers, and how we at ActiveProspect aid in the compliance of the upcoming FCC one-to-one consent rule. For those of you who do not know me yet, my name is Matt Frazier. I am the GM of insurance here at ActiveProspect. I've been in the lead generation and performance marketing space for the last 13 years and have been lucky enough to work with many advertisers, carriers, and publishers alike. So I can definitely understand how this new FCC ruling impacts all sides of the industry. So with that, I would love to pass the mic over to Christopher Williams and Justin Guido for brief introductions. Christopher.
Hey, everybody, and Happy New Year. Welcome to our first webinar of 2025. I'm super excited to be here. Hopefully you are too. My name is Christopher Williams. I'm the product manager for TrustedForm. It means I help to figure out what new things we should work on here at ActiveProspect and try to make sure that we can solve all of your problems. Hopefully I've at least talked to a couple of you. I see we have a ton of people in this webinar. I would love to get a chance to talk to all of you, but hopefully I'm lucky enough to do that. I have spent the last 10 plus years creating marketing software, and I've been at ActiveProspect now for about 3. So it's been a great ride. I'm super excited and glad to be here at this webinar.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. I'm Justin Guido, Customer Success Team Lead, and I work exclusively with AP's enterprise level insurance customers. Been in the performance marketing space for about 12 years. And just had my 4-year anniversary at AP. I'm also our self-proclaimed college football aficionado, undisputed. But thanks for joining us today. Really look forward to an interactive session.
Yeah, and it's great to have you both on this panel. Total rock stars here at ActiveProspect. So excited to see what we can dive into today. So I guess to start, the FCC one-to-one consent rule, we are rapidly approaching January 27th, which is the day that the FCC currently has as the switchover to the one-to-one consent. The TCPA one-to-one consent rule is a regulatory requirement established by the FCC to ensure that consumers provide prior express written consent for receiving marketing communications to each advertiser who contacts them. And for advertisers, I think this might be the most important change for you is the new requirements. The advertiser is now the one that bears nearly all the legal and financial risk in an inquiry. So having a third-party document proof of consent is paramount. So with that being said, I think we should start and have a little fun, jump into a poll question. The poll today to start is, if you have not already implemented a one-to-one solution, what are you waiting for? We have a couple of different options there for feedback, and we will take those now. And while we wait for the results, let's jump over to Christopher, and Christopher help provide a little bit more insight into TrustedForm Retain and Verify. I think a good place to start is to give us some insight on Retain and Verify and how they work together.
All right. I'm happy to do that. And hopefully everyone here at least knows a little bit about TrustedForm, but just in case, we want to make sure we give everybody equal chance to know about our product offerings. And you're on a webinar with the product manager. So hopefully you expected to hear a little bit about our products themselves, especially how they can actually help you get ready for all these updates. So let me start off with TrustedForm Retain. Retain is our solution that actually allows you to store a record of the events that led to a lead being created. It used to be called claim and consent. Those are previous versions of it, but they all result in the same thing, and that is a certificate getting stored in your account so that you can have that proof of what actually happened. And if you don't know what a certificate is, let me actually show you that too. So this on your screen right now is an example of a certificate. And inside of it, you can see all of the basic data around the lead that was actually created. Things like when it was created, how long they were on the page, what their IP address was, just so you can have confidence that things were represented accurately when you were sold this lead. Now, one of the really, really cool things that everybody loves is the fact that you can actually watch a session replay of how that lead was created. So when you watch this, it's actually going to be a recreation of what actually happened on the website when the lead was filling out their info and hopefully actually gave their consent to be contacted to you. There's, an old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So you can imagine if I just tried to give you a paragraph telling you how a lead was generated, that probably wouldn't mean much, right? So a picture is great. Well, this is even more than a picture. It's like a moving picture, almost like a video. And I say almost because it's not actually a video. We don't have cameras over people's shoulders recording them or anything like that. But we do take super detailed logs so that we can create that recreation. And you can visually actually see what happened. Then everybody can understand. So once you actually have that actual record of what happened, people generally use that to prove whether or not the consumer gave consent, right? You can watch that and you can make a judgment for yourself to see, hey, did they check what needs to be checked? Was the right language there and all that? But if you're going to do that for all of your leads, right, you can imagine you don't want to sit there and watch every single session replay. So how do we let you handle this for all of your leads rather than doing it on a one-by-one basis? This is where TrustedForm Verify comes in. So TrustedForm Verify is our solution that allows you to programmatically confirm that your requirements have been met, and ultimately it helps you to stay compliant. So what you're seeing right now is a great graphic because this is our consent language manager where you can see a list of all the various consent languages that are used to create your leads. So these are all of the text that was shown to leads in hopes to get their consent. And one of the first things that you need to do when you're actually checking to see if you got consent is make sure that the right text was actually shown. So here you can see all these variations, and then you can go into our UI and you can approve them or reject them, which basically tells us whether or not you think that was good enough or not to actually be considered as meaningful consent. So once you use that, you can really automate this process that you don't have to go and look through every single lead. But since we're also talking about the new one-to-one consent update, there's another piece that I have to mention as well. The newest piece to verify is our one-to-one consent check. So this actually allows you to know whether or not the consent that was given in a one-to-one manner. Right. So there's been a lot of talk around what exactly that means. And trust me, we've talked to dozens of publishers, advertisers, legal experts, everyone, trying to make sure that we have a good idea of what the industry will kind of lead towards. And there are really two cases that we focus on. And one, the first one is when there's only one advertiser listed in the actual consent language. That's pretty obvious that in that case, that is one-to-one consent because there's only one person getting consent. But then the other, when there are multiple advertisers listed, we make sure that there's actually a way for the consumer to pick which ones they want to give consent to. So through a simple check, we can actually just tell you whether or not you were one of the ones that got consent or if you were the only one listed there and therefore have gotten consent in a one-to-one manner. So overall, Verify really just helps you to do all of the checks that you need to do to make sure that your leads are meeting your requirements without having to look at each one individually. And when you look at Retain and Verify together, they're really like a 1-2 punch just to make sure that you have a fighting chance against all of the different fraudsters, the litigators, just even mistakes that could be made to make sure that anything that could threaten you, you have a way to filter that out and catch it proactively.
Yeah, and Christopher, I think a really good point there that we can kind of draw on is that within that UI, when you see the approving and rejecting of consent language, you can actually see the frequency of times that consent has come through. So when you're going through and auditing, which consent languages are being represented by your brand, I guess, you can actually see, hey, this actually came up 500 times. So we gotta make it either approve it or reject it and take it back to the publisher. So that's a cool feature that I've noticed within the portal as well.
Absolutely, because one of the things that we learned is that managing all those consent language variations, it's a big task. So we have a lot of tools there to help you prioritize and make sure that you're looking at the right stuff. And I want to also note that we're continuing to add more and more tools to the Verify product. So that's going to be more things to help you prioritize, more checks that you can execute to make sure that your leads are compliant. It's a growing product and honestly a must-have for anybody who's concerned about the TCPA or any regulations.
Yeah. Yep. That's awesome. I'm sure we can dig into a lot more of that. We will as we move forward. But let's take a look at the poll results and see if they align with your initial thinking, Justin and Christopher. But it's good to see at least half of you are ready to go. The other half is either still evaluating. Don't know what to do. I think if you don't know what to do, we'd love to talk with you independently and see what you're up to and see where we can help you for sure.
Yeah. And I'll add, if you're evaluating, we would love to know what you're evaluating. Like, what criteria are you using to decide what you're going to actually do to come to a solution for this? Because once again, the clock is ticking. We only have 12 more days, right? So hopefully your evaluation process isn't going to take much longer.
Yeah, and feel free to interact with us as we go through this, and you can add any of that information into the chat for feedback. So if you are evaluating and you have a couple of things that you want to chat about, love to hear what you're thinking. One of the things too that is interesting to know is that 6% think it could be canceled or pushed. And I know based at like lead generation world, for example, there's a lot of talk about that too. Christopher, do you want to maybe give a little insight of what we think there as far as, being protected no matter what?
Well, I think this is probably a great time to say my disclosure or my disclaimer. First of all, I am not a legal expert. I don't know what's going to happen. I have no crystal ball, and anything I say is not legal advice whatsoever, but just things that we have learned and best practices that we have seen. And in terms of whether or not this is going to get pushed and kind of like how you should interpret that, our stance is that no matter what, you need to make sure that your leads have given you consent. That is definitely the best, the safest way to proceed. Honestly, the most profitable way to proceed too. And I'm sure we'll go in more to that, later. But regardless of what happens with this, if it's pushed, if it's not, if it's delayed, if it's canceled, you're going to need to actually make sure that you have processes in place to ensure that you're getting the consent that your business needs. And really, one-to-one consent, I understand it's a high standard, but it's a great standard to go by. And even if you're not checking necessarily for one-to-one consent, like I said, you still need to verify that there is some form of consent there. And that's exactly what our TrustedForm Verify product does.
Yeah, love that, Christopher. We do have a couple of questions coming in. Jim, thanks for the question. What are some reasons causing TrustedForm to fail a lead?
Ooh, that is a great question. So if we're talking in the context of Verify right now, I mentioned how there are kind of two things that Verify is checking for. So the first thing is that the consent language is actually a language that you yourself have approved, that you said is a good language to use in order to get consent for a lead. So let's say that you've noted in our system that it's okay if the language is something like I consent to receive marketing calls, by call or text, yada, yada, yada. by the way, go look at one of the legal expert sites to figure out how you should actually, form that language. Shout out to the Troutman firm, because the Troutman 15 list them out, very well for you. But once you've, confirmed in our system what language you accept, when a lead comes in, we'll see, did it use that language, or did it use some other random language that maybe you don't know about, or maybe that you've already said is bad. So if it does use, something you don't know about or said is bad, that would actually cause it to fail. And then the other case is if they use a process that doesn't actually give you consent in a one-to-one manner. And these are all configurable as to like how you want to make leads fail or not. But in the one-to-one case, like I said, we look for two very specific scenarios. Either your name is the only name listed in the consent language, and therefore you're the only company getting consent, that classifies as one-to-one, or there's a list of companies getting consent that have a way for the consumer to select which ones they want to hear from. And in that case, we make sure that your company was indeed selected. So if neither of those are true, then the lead would fail.
Yeah. And you can still decision off of those as well, right? So, it could be a fail, but, there also might be, a benefit to not taking in a lead that may not have the right compliance language that you would want into your CRM in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I say fail, I just mean that is what the verify operation will return. It'll tell you it fails, but from there you get to decide what you want to actually do with that lead. And we'll definitely go more into that later too.
For sure. All right, let's do one more, because this one's interesting and we're getting a lot of upvotes on it from Dave. Thanks for the question, Dave. Are there any updates on rolling out TrustedForm for TikTok Instaforms? I know we've talked about that in the past, and similar to our Facebook lead ads process.
Oh, also great question. I love that. And Dave, I hope that you've left us some product feedback requesting this if it's something that you're really interested in. But the updates there, so platforms like Facebook, TikTok, they are very insulated. It's hard to talk to the people there. It's hard to get them to use our technology. We are in conversations. So hopefully we'll have some positive news to share very soon. I don't want to say too much more than that. But we do have to make sure that we work with those companies to actually get them to use the TrustedForm technology and thus be able to generate TrustedForm certificates from them.
Perfect. Before we jump into steps, let's just see if there's one more that we can talk about. We have one from an anonymous user. But can you please clarify the following? I've been loading consent languages into the consent language manager. What else do I need to do from a one-to-one consent? And maybe that is a good segue, Christopher, into maybe our step-to-step guide, or we can talk about that now.
All right. Well, yeah, I think I'll address this before I go into the guide a little bit.
Okay.
So kind of once again, reiterating, there are two things that Verify checks for, right? Is that the language is the right language, and then it can check for whether or not consent was given in a one-to-one manner. So when you're loading languages into your consent language manager, that's helping the process to check to make sure that the language was actually right. Now, this can get a little confusing because if the right language is there, maybe you can use that to confirm that it was one-to-one, meaning that if the language only lists your company, you could just use that check and then be, very certain that you actually have one-to-one consent. But we have another feature that is for detecting one-to-one consent, no matter how it shows up, right? Whether it's just your name in that language or that list of advertisers. So if you're really focused on confirming that you have one-to-one consent, I recommend you use the one-to-one consent check, which is separate from your consent language manager.
Awesome. And we'll continue to go through these questions as we move forward, but let's move on and dig a little bit deeper here. I think something that would be really helpful as you, the advertiser, navigates through implementing your verified TrustedForm account is, Justin and Christopher, maybe give us a step-by-step guide to implementing the TrustedForm Verify solution. What would be step number one, Christopher?
Great questions. We definitely want to make sure that everybody is ready, or at least knows all the steps that they need to go through to get ready. So for me, step number one is really to coordinate with your publishers. I think a lot of the times we'll hear people asking us how they do something, and our first response is, well, what did you and your publisher agree on? And then they kind of look blankly and they don't really have an answer. So I want to really make this point clear. For anything that you're doing, you have to work with your publishers or your vendors, whoever it is that you're actually getting the leads from. They are going to be key in making sure that, you know, everything is compliant, that it meets your requirements, that just you are aligned on what exactly is happening. So for that, the first thing I would recommend is making sure that you understand, like, or that each of you have the same understanding of what is compliant, right? Like, I understand that the FCC has released these updates, but they've been interpreted a lot of ways. Even if you listen to the expert lawyers, they don't all say exactly the same thing. So if you're just, you know, saying, hey, I need you to make these leads compliant, that's probably not good enough. You actually have to write out what your requirements are so that they know what things to change in their processes to meet all of your needs. And by the way, all of this should be discussed with your legal or compliance team so that you can actually figure out what your company's requirements are.
Right.
And there's a lot of more things that I think you should also talk about too. Like, for example, what are the acceptable reasons for post rejects in the one-to-one consent world? Post rejects are a very touchy topic because now a lot of leads are being generated specifically for you. So if you, the advertiser, then reject it, well, your vendor is kind of up the creek without a paddle. They're like, I made this for you. You don't want it. That's just lost money now. And generally that does not make them happy. So you really need to make sure that you specify what reasons you can actually reject a lead for. Make sure you both agree on that so that you don't have this case where at the end of the month you say, oh, I'm rejecting these leads for X, Y, and Z reason. And they're just like, what? I didn't say you could do that. So yeah. Just talk.
Yeah, it's like looking long term at, like, if it maybe like a duplicate lead might be a great example of that. It's like if you don't know about that in real time, you get down at the end of the month, that could be a real problem. So that's a really big call out, Christopher.
Absolutely. And I'm gonna try to go through these quick. There's so many things though that you need to talk about, like just the actual changes that they're making to their lead forms. You know, everyone pretty much has to change something to be compliant with the one-to-one consent rule. So make sure that the way that they're changing it, that you're okay with, you all have agreed on that. There may be changes in lead price due to, you know, these changes. Once you have a lead that's dedicated to you, there's a good chance it's going to cost you a little bit more. Also, just making sure that you update your contracts. We're talking about all these things that you need to align on. Well, the only real way to make sure both of you are aligned on it is honestly putting it in writing. So I definitely do recommend that. Another one that is especially important with TrustedForm Verify in play is to provide your vendors and publishers your legal entity name. Once again, this is kind of something that's been interpreted different ways, but in the update, it says that you can only give one-to-one consent to one legal entity at a time. So make sure that whoever is getting consent for you, that you give them the right name to use, because if you give them, you know, Company A as your name, but legally you're listed as Company A Incorporated or something like that, that could result in some issues. Once again, I'm not a legal expert, so I don't know if it will, but it definitely could. So if you want to play it safe, just make sure you actually give them the proper names to use. And then just the last couple of things I'll note is that we do actually on our website have a great template that you can send to your vendors to get the conversation started. It's an email template with links to how they can add the necessary changes to enable Verify's new one-to-one consent check and just kind of get that conversation started. And lastly, make sure they send you a test lead. After you go through all this and you aligned on things, just make sure that you actually get a test lead so you can make sure that everything's working the way it's supposed to. Because if you don't actually test it, there's a good chance that once you go live, something's going to be broken and no one's going to realize it until it's at the point where it loses people money.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things I would love to clarify with you too is when you're going out and reaching out to your publishers, if they are already tagging for maybe another client or for their process in general, can you give us a little insight there of like maybe that's a really good thing and they don't have to do additional steps?
Yeah, that is a great point. The way that we generally, kind of push people is to go request them to do this, but they may have already done it, and that's great. That means that they just get to reply back to you and say already done, which I'm sure makes everybody happy when you can check something off your to-do list, but you don't have to do any work for it.
Yeah. So as an advertiser, that's great for you, right? It's like, good. Now you really know, hey, these publishers that I'm working with are these lead generators. They're doing things right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great time to note that we already do have hundreds of publishers who have already made these changes. So, there's a pretty good chance that maybe the vendor that you're working with will already have this handled. But once again, you do want to make sure. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Are we ready for step number 2? Are there any questions about step number 1? Move forward. We'll take them now, but if not, we can move on to step number 2.
All right. Well, I will keep the conversation rolling, but yeah, feel free to jump in if you all see a question that I should stop and answer. So step number 1, once again, was communicating with your publisher. Step number 2 is to enable TrustedForm Verify. Of course, this is very specific to those users of our product, but hey, we think everybody should be using our product. So I'm going to say it to everybody, go enable TrustedForm Verify. So to enable it, the first thing you have to do, right, is get it. For anybody here who's already a customer, if you're a managed customer, then you're going to want to go talk to your CSM, which is a lovely person like Justin here. If you're one of Justin's clients, you're a lucky person. Just, I guess, and sorry to put you on the spot, but do you want to just say a couple of sentences about the process to actually?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, if you're, again, self-service, then it would just be an easy, quick sign up on the website yourself. Also, still easy if you're a managed customer, just go through your customer success manager and they can work with you on getting pricing and just a simple amendment to your existing contract. And then once that's signed, we enable it on the back end. And we can get you rolling, right? Walk you through all the steps that Christopher kind of just described, as well as, getting that initial management of the consent disclosures, doing any troubleshooting, and just helping you along the way with any questions. So, our team is standing by and ready to help.
Perfect. Yeah. So as Justin said, it really is an easy process. Andrew just posted a link there in chat for you to follow, that you can just go to that now, learn a little bit more about Verify and get it right there now. So that really is, the next step. Just enable Verify. After you have it enabled, then you have to actually use it. And when I say use it, I mean you need to filter your non-compliant leads. So we talked about how Verify will kind of tell you whether or not that text is good text for you to use and whether or not you have consent in a one-to-one manner. But once you get that data, you actually have to do something with it, right? And like I said, it's up to you to figure out what you want to do with it. You can either straight up reject those leads if you've talked to your vendor about that and have agreed that you're going to be rejecting leads that do fail the Verify operation. Maybe you just want to simply not contact them because it's not worth the risk, contacting a lead that you don't have prior express written consent for under the new TCPA updates. Maybe you want to do something like email them so that you can get some additional consent just to make sure you're covered. There are honestly a lot of strategies there. I'm not going to go over all of them now, but definitely you want to make sure that you do something that is the best for your business that you talked about with your legal and compliance team. That's going to actually, keep everybody safe and help you to keep those numbers going up. So once you actually figure out what you want to do, you have to implement that logic to actually do it, right? And that changes depending upon where you're putting that logic. So there are kind of 3 different options here. Number 1 is within our lead conduit product. This is, of course, our preferred method. Lead conduit is an ActiveProspect product, so it works very well with TrustedForm Verify and has everything kind of simply built in, so that all you have to do is basically click and select things, and it just all goes super smoothly. But hey, if you don't use lead conduit, that's fine. Maybe use another platform, something like a Bobberdo or Leads Prosper, Leadspedia. There's a lot of them out there. We actually have a number of them who already support the verified product. So, hey, it should be a pretty easy process. But regardless, you want to make sure that you talk with them and their support team to get you set up. They'll have their own set of instructions around what you need to do to integrate with TrustedForm Verify, and they'll be the best resource to tell you how to actually go about that. And if they don't integrate with us yet, I would love it if you would file a feature request with them to integrate with us. I know that there are a lot of platforms who want to, but sometimes things get pushed down the list of to-dos because they're like, oh, people aren't asking for it yet. And that may just, so you may be the one thing stopping them from actually implementing it. If you go in and make your voice heard, it'll be there. So please definitely go do that.
Yeah, and I'll just say too, before we move on, we just got Phonexa as well launched with Verify. So, keep them coming.
Awesome.
We love that.
Perfect. Yeah, that list is going to keep growing for sure.
Yeah.
And then the last option there is if you actually have your own internal homegrown system, where you're handling all your leads and you can customize it how you want. In that case, you really just need to talk to your development team and pass on the actual instruction or the API documentation to use Verify. And you're going to want to tell them to filter out, leads where Verify fails. And if Verify is successful, then obviously keep the lead, pass it on, and make sure you retain that certificate. But in that case, yeah, they'll just be kind of making their own judgment calls based off of our documentation. But our support team is more than happy to actually help them kind of figure out what logic they need to add to just make sure that things work the way that you want them to. All right. And now we are headed to the last step of this process. So you already kind of have leads filtered out and you have the good leads coming in. Hopefully you're doing something with the bad leads to keep yourself safe. After all that, the thing I just want to note is that you do need to continue to constantly or regularly, periodically review your consent language. I talked a little bit about how in the Verify product, we have that consent language manager. It keeps populating with all the new consent languages that were used for the leads that you have purchased. You have to review that. Otherwise, there's going to be a whole bunch of consent languages, showing up there that you've never reviewed and that you're rejecting right now because you haven't reviewed them. So you want to make sure that you take a look at that, go through them. Once again, the ones that are good, you should mark them as approved. If they're bad, mark them as rejected. But that just helps make sure that you're evolving with the times, because compliance is not like a set it and forget it kind of thing. You have to keep doing work to make sure you stay updated and just that all your flows are actually working properly. And if you have any idea of the potential risk involved with not being compliant, then I think you'll agree that it is definitely worth the effort. So that is the end of my list, but I know what a lot of you are waiting to hear from is just kind of why is this so important? What can it really do for me and my business? What do I get out of it? So Justin, what are some things that you've actually heard from our customers as to why this entire process is important to them?
Yep. Thanks, Christopher. And I'll just mention one more thing on the consent language manager, because it's a great point. You do need like a person that's dedicated to every couple of days or at least once a week, I'd recommend going in and checking the unreviewed tab, because otherwise, those consent languages are kind of just stuck in limbo. And like we mentioned earlier, it's super easy to filter by frequency, right? So if you want to prioritize the ones where I've seen, you've seen 500 leads with the exact same consent disclosure that are in that unreviewed queue, you're going to want to tackle all those before you have to get to the ones that are, one-offs, right? And you can also filter by the last updated or last seen date. So if you know that everything that came in, in November is not doesn't already have one-to-one proper consent language, you can kind of put those on the back burner and focus on the most recent ones. So it's really intuitive once you get into the platform, but yeah, it's an important point to make. But yes, in terms of like how it's helping our buyers and our customers, we talk a little bit about helping the performance through compliance. So the verified consent, it drives trust, enhances the ROI by helping your leads meet the highest standard of quality and compliance. So with the one-to-one consent rule, the consumers are now aware prior to lead submission which brand or brands will be reaching out to them specifically, right? So this naturally sets the stage for a better, higher quality interaction between the consumer and the brand. And also why it's helpful to buyers. I mean, I've spoken to, I personally manage a few insurance carrier account relationships. And the feedback I've gotten so far is it's been great, right? By being able to filter leads from, out of your outreach pipeline that either didn't see approved consent language, didn't give express one-to-one consent to be contacted, or both, right? They're saving money and resources on their agent's time. They're saving on TrustedForm retain or claim costs by not retaining those certificates, not needing to retain those certificates that they're not going to be calling because they didn't pass that, the verified check. And they're also at the same time, right, protecting themselves from a compliance standpoint. So, these customers I've spoken to, like, obviously they love having that peace of mind, knowing that everything is just above board and they're doing everything that they can, following the letter of the law, while simultaneously improving performance. Another thing, just to reiterate, while it does take the setup process for Verify, there's a little bit of housekeeping, which we've gone over in preparation between the advertisers and the publishers. It definitely sets up both parties for success. And it's also just a great opportunity. I mean, if you have, daily communication with your publishers, great, right? But it's just another opportunity to increase that overall collaboration and work closely and keep the communication open as to expectations and just being in overall alignment and transparency.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, hitting on just that additional friction, I think when we're looking at lead funnels, right, it's, throughout the existence of this lead generation channel, there's been, kind of like shared and exclusive leads, but being able to kind of have that additional layer of friction really when it comes to, hey, this is the brand who is going to be calling, right? So like the days of, yesterday is, you have a shared link of multiple different providers. Oops, I think I froze. Multiple different providers who could potentially be reaching out to you. You could be getting a call as a consumer from somebody that you're like, who? But now it's like the brands that are going to be, that you're going to be able to see within that consent language are going to be the ones that are reaching out to you. So I think that alone creates a completely different user experience. And for the buyers, it's not necessarily you explaining who you are and what you're doing, but really getting into the actual sale. So,
yep.
So I think another point here, Justin, what we have is, when you have a managed account here, what role does the CSM play in the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you're a new customer, we're essentially acting as a project manager, getting you onboarded, right? Gathering the appropriate internal resources, scheduling a technical onboarding calls between, your developer and our implementation engineer and implementation team, just ensuring that we're enabling you to go live as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible, all while making sure nothing slips through the cracks. So just checking off on every single task and to do in the onboarding process so that the seamless configuration of your lead flow along with, claiming and retaining as well as verify are tested and, tried and tested. If you're an existing customer and we're adding new products and features, it's similar, but we would loop in basically a sales engineer up front to do an overall scoping to make sure that this is an appropriate product or feature for you based on your current use case. And that would occur prior to, contracting and signing an amendment or adding those new products. And after that point, pretty much the same process in terms of that overall onboarding. And then once you're live and everything is going great, it's just the ongoing check-ins, maintenance, feedback, and any improvements that, I can relay to someone like Christopher, suggestions, and just making sure that our customers are happy and everything's going well.
Love it. All right, so let's jump into a few questions now while we can. And there are two questions that I think might overlap a little bit and both have a lot of upvotes. So let's chat on those for a little bit. And Christopher, I know neither one of us or Justin are legal experts here, so I'm going to make sure that's clear. But the questions are around, is there a practical guide to how to get consent from more than one entity to contact consumers for marketing purposes that avoids getting too many checkboxes, one checkbox for TSO or TOS, and second for internal marketing, and the dreaded third in total? Marketing departments are hesitant to add too many checkboxes due to the fear of hurting conversions. Is there a way to add a 2-in-1 that a consumer can toggle on and off? Long question, but that's a really good question. Do we have a stance there or any additional feedback?
I love this. It is a very long question, Matt, because it covers your face entirely. But yeah, this is definitely a very it's a deep question. This is the question that I definitely say go talk to your legal department to actually figure out what you should do. What I can tell you, though, are things that we have seen in the market, and you can talk once again with your legal department to figure out if this is good for you. But yes, obviously adding more and more check boxes that is proven to hurt conversion rates. No performance marketer wants to do that. But you have to kind of figure out what the minimum requirement is, at least for you to be compliant, right? So this question talks about adding check boxes in a lot of places. So my first thought is, I see a lot of people who don't necessarily have check places everywhere that this question says. Like, you don't necessarily have to have a checkbox for the terms of service, for example. Or once again, at least I've seen people who don't have checkboxes for the terms of service. So maybe you can figure out ways to limit where you're actually putting these checkboxes to only the absolutely required places. Another strategy that we've seen is to actually show the checkboxes, but have them pre-selected. That helps. But once again, there are people who kind of have different opinions on whether or not that's okay. So you got to make sure you talk with your legal team and your partners as well, just to make sure you're all aligned there. But yeah, you can always find ways to kind of not add so many checkboxes, but just limit the number that you're adding to help there.
Yeah, really great question there. We have a couple more. There's actually a couple questions here that focus a little bit on accountability, right, and liability, probably. But thanks, Chris, for that question. What is the penalty for companies buying the lead? What is the penalty for the company buying the lead? Is the vendor was not compliant with one-to-one? Is the accountability fully on the lead vendor? So I think we talked about that in the very beginning. That part of this rule is that the advertiser is going to be the one who's held probably liable and moving forward. So I don't know, Christopher or Justin, if you have any additional feedback there.
So I mean, my understanding was the onus is on the buyer, is on the individual reaching out to that consumer, right? So that's why, I mean, Verify is a reaction to that ruling, and that's why we try to verify that you do have one-to-one consent. But at the end of the day, it's on the buyer.
Yeah, and the penalties, like as far as the monetary amount, that you can be charged at least, up to $1,500 per call under the TCPA. There could be other penalties there as well. That once again, I'm sure a legal expert would be able to educate you on much better than I can. But they can get really high. If you look at any of the class action lawsuits that have happened over TCPA, they are giant amounts, in the millions upon millions of dollars. So I can at least confidently say it's a penalty you don't want to have to incur.
Yeah, agreed. And we retain certificates for 5 years or longer, depending on what you want to do as an organization. But we do hold those for 5 years for just that exact case. Let's do a couple more while we're here. It's 2:45.
Rolling.
Yeah, let's do it. So keep them coming. We love these questions. They're really, really good. Thank you, Cindy. This one's interesting. Can you clarify the consent needed for inbound calls? Also, any additional consent needed for inbound calls that gets transferred to a client? So we're looking at both a raw inbound call and a warm transfer that could be either driven by a data lead or driven by inbound call. So we have a couple of things there. Christopher, if you want to start, maybe we can kind of play off that one because this is an interesting one.
Sure thing. This is a great conversation. This is actually one that we're looking a lot into right now. So technically, the TCPA doesn't mention inbound calls. So most people interpret that as the TCPA does not regulate inbound calls, meaning if it's an inbound call, you don't really have to worry about it as much, right? The issue that often happens with our customers, though, is that they may get an inbound call that is transferred from someone else, and they don't really know if it's an inbound call. If I just send a call to you and I tell you, oh, yeah, it's an inbound call, do you just trust me? Or I don't know, like, do you need to do some more checking to make sure? Because if what actually happened, let's say that I actually called up a lead that I generated from a data lead and then transferred it to you and told you it was an inbound call, but actually it was an outbound call that I just transferred, you're going to still potentially end up being liable for that. So in terms of what types of consent is needed, in my opinion, you should always seek to get the highest form of consent. So you want to make sure you abide by the TCPA and get prior express written consent, which, with the one-to-one consent updates means getting it in a one-to-one manner. I'm going to also emphasize the written part because I know that there was a case recently where someone thought they had consent because it was verbal and they had it recorded, but it did not go well for them. So yeah, you still basically want to make sure that you still have the same type of consent as far as I know.
Yeah. And then for inbound calls, right, where there's not a warm transfer, right? So you can look at these as two different things completely, right? A warm transfer typically is an outbound dial that is made by a vendor to qualify a lead and then hand them off to a buyer, right? So in those instances, getting TCPA on that initial data field or that data feed is the right way to do it. But now for a raw inbound call that's coming off of a click to call or a mobile event or something that's generated offline, what kind of things exist out there? What can we help there? I know we have a couple of ideas floating around, so I don't know if we want to tease that too much, but is there anything that we want to kind of touch on here?
Yeah, that's actually a great point to bring up. So I did say earlier that this is a problem that we're looking at a lot. And what I was referring to is even if you do get a raw inbound call, so let's say your number is listed somewhere, the call comes directly to you, it's inbound, right? The issue that we also see with customers is that there may be cases where they may take that call initially, but then there's a need to call the customer back. Maybe the call gets dropped. Maybe they say now isn't a good time. Can you call me back later? Maybe you just need to have a follow-up, If they when they do the inbound call and they call you, great. TCPA doesn't really apply there. But the second you decide you need to call them back for any reason, TCPA applies again. So the really, really good idea to make sure that you can always do your follow-ups or, any kind of callback that you need to do is once again to get that prior express written consent. So what a lot of people are kind of moving towards, and something that we're actually also working on, is making sure that while you're on that call, you have a really simple, easy way to go get that written consent. So this could be in the form of sending someone a text message that leads them to a website so they can get their consent, maybe getting that consent in a text message itself, but just getting it somewhere where it is actually written and not just them saying, sure, call me back at some point. Because once again, that has proven to not necessarily work out for people when they try to use that defense in court. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And yeah, that's definitely a big one that's out there that we hear a lot about, and very, very interesting. So more to come there as we move forward. So we have a couple things, and we'll get back to some questions here as we close out. But to ask you, the audience, like based on the conversations that you're having with your lead publishers about one-to-one consent changes, are there any concerns that you're hearing about this impact? We'd love to hear those and kind of talk through those with you as well. And then we also have the poll. We also have a poll live too. If you're interested in a demo of our product and service, we would love to have you add to the poll there, and we'll make that happen. So we will interact with that question here in a moment. And let's just see if there's any other questions that we want to. Sorry, I was. Can we add a select all checkbox in the list of buyers? It's also a very common question that we can absolutely talk about real quick. I think that's a good one.
Yeah, that is a great one. Like I said, it's super common. Fortunately, this is another one that I will once again say, consult with your legal team. As far as TrustedForm Verify goes, yes, you can add a select all button. We don't discriminate on how the checkbox is checked right now for the one-to-one consent check. And I will note that we have future checks planned that will tell advertisers how checkboxes were actually checked, so they can kind of create their own logic there right now. But specifically for the one-to-one consent check, whether your company name's checkbox was checked using a select all, whether it was checked or whether it was pre-checked, or whether the consumer actually, clicked it to check it, those are all kind of treated the same way. If any of those things happen, we will return that we think you have consent in a one-to-one manner in that case. So for us, select all buttons are okay as far as our product goes, but legally you still need to have those discussions. Justin, I am curious, have you heard from any customers as to whether or not they're allowing select all buttons, or how they want to handle that?
I've heard from a couple, yeah, but just like, as you might expect, or maybe not, but it's kind of a mixed bag, really, right? You might hear from one client in Medicare or in PNC that's doing things by the book a certain way, and then another hasn't even considered it that way. So it really is a mixed bag, and I think hopefully people are basing it, like you said, on what their internal counsel has kind of recommended.
Yeah, and I think Justin, another question here that I think aligns well here is, do vendors need to add these consent tags in order to turn on verify or verify checkbox in lead conduit?
Ooh.
So, yeah, go ahead. Well, I'll give my best shot, and Christopher can correct me, but do vendors need to? Yes, vendors absolutely need to implement the consent tagging in order for the product to work for the buyer, right? There's no cost to the vendor to add those. Think of it just like with TrustedForm, right? The vendors have to add the JavaScript, the free script to their webpage in order for the buyer to be able to claim the certificate and watch the session replay. Same idea with Verify. In order for Verify to work and for buyers to be able to successfully verify whether or not they have one-to-one consent, they're dependent on their publishers to have those consent tags already completed prior to the check.
Yeah, absolutely. Verify and a lot of its features are going to be relying on those tags going forward. Right now, it is specifically the one-to-one consent check that really relies on that. For example, you could still check to see if the consent language used matches what you have approved, even if they haven't used those consent tags yet. I also just noted kind of a small nuance in the question. They were asking about the verify checkbox and lead conduit. I know everyone on the call may not be familiar with the way that lead conduit works, but in it, there is an integration with TrustedForm in which you can check which of the TrustedForm product offerings you want to use. So if your verify checkbox right now is not checkable, like, you try to check it and you can't, that probably means your account does not have access to the verified product. So definitely, if you're a self-service customer, you want to go to that enablement page to turn on the verified product. And if you're a managed customer with a CSM, you want to talk to that CSM to make sure you can get access to it.
Yeah, that's fantastic insight there. All right. So any other key takeaways, any other things that we want to cover here as we are closing out? I guess you, Christopher.
Sorry, yeah, just one quick thing that I did want to mention. The entire process that I walked through is actually a checklist that we have on our webpage. I don't think that we actually noted that. So if you search for our advertiser readiness checklist or publisher readiness checklist too, because they're both on the actual same page, that'll be a great resource to you. And you can follow along with all the things that I talked about here, and it gives you all of those same points.
Awesome. Justin?
Any other final words? All of it. Yeah, I mean, like it's a pretty thorough and detailed checklist, and I think we did a good job of kind of combing through all of the points. I can put it. Oh, looks like Andrew he beat me to the punch. So there's the checklist there in the event chat. But no, I mean, that's everything I wanted to touch on.
Awesome. All right. Well, then I think we are going to wrap it up for today. A huge thank you to everyone for taking the time out of your day and participating in this webinar. Your questions and interactions help these webinars come to life. And thank you, Christopher and Justin, for providing some really great content. And I hope you all are walking away with some actionable insights to help you prepare for updated TCPA regulations coming on January 27th. Also, please mark your calendars and join us next Wednesday for our next webinar, TCPA Update Readiness, a step-by-step checklist for publishers. This webinar will be similar to the one we had today, but will be focused on the new compliance requirements from a publisher's perspective. And lastly, if you would like to continue this conversation, which we hope you do, please reach out to us via the Contact Us link that is in the chat or by answering our poll. Again, thank you to everyone who joined. Have a great day, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.